I think we're recording. Okay, cool. Hello, everybody. I'm Virginia,
I'm Rae.
and we're going to screen share here and show you our PowerPoint. Yeah, we are. Great. Rae, can you see this?
Yeah, I can.
Cool. Okay, so we did our Netflix and Think on Modern Family, and we were focused specifically on the first season, but we've kind of looked at it as an arc over the past 11 seasons. Cool. So before we begin, I love Modern Family, and although there are a lot of kind of negative, nitpicky things that we're going to talk about in this presentation, I think that it was really revolutionary in a lot of ways, especially when it first came out. I honestly, when it first came out 11 years ago, didn't notice a lot of these shortcomings that it had. And I think that has just come with some of it didn't age well, and we have all grown as people. Um, but I have seen such a huge change in the 11 season arc of the show. Um, and that is just really remarkable. We're going to mainly talk about some specific characters, a few key concepts, and then some overall observations. Cool. So we're going to start with Mitch and Cam. And if you've never seen the show, they're a gay couple that adopt a baby in the first episode. They fall kind of in the stereotype of heteronormativity, even if they're a same-sex couple. Cameron is seen as more of the wife, and there are a lot of jokes made at his expense. In the first episode, there's a joke made about maybe Lily, the baby, needs to feel a woman's figure, and kind of at the expense of Cam being a bigger guy, he's put into this wife role. He also is the one that stays at home with the baby. He's the over emotional character, and the dramatic one, according to the family. There are a lot of jokes made at his expense that kind of point out the anti-feminism of making all of those negative traits a woman's trait.
Another point in season 1 is Cam doesn't show physical affection to his husband at all. And actually on Facebook, it was so prevalent that there was a campaign started that saying that they should be allowed to kiss and show affection as much as the heterosexual couples. Allegedly, the lack of affection was a plot point that the writers hoped to bring up in season 2, which I hope is the case, but a lot of people believed it was just because people would be uncomfortable seeing two men be physically affectionate with each other.
Yeah. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the casual racism and homophobia that existed, at least in the earlier seasons. The show has aged better than it started when it comes to these couple of things. I'm going to play a short video clip to kind of point out there are a ton of jokes made at Lily, the adopted daughter, made at her expense. And one of the main jokes that articles now bring up about not aging well and being kind of gross is this joke right here that Phil makes in the first episode.
Lily? Lily, isn't that going to be hard for her to say?
So that is just a joke that kind of passed everybody by in the first viewing of this show, but it's obviously super racially insensitive and a stereotype. And then in the same episode, or the same season, 3 episodes later, the Mitch and Cam are super racially insensitive to their Vietnamese doctor, and make all these jokes about maybe you can teach her, and how do you pronounce these words, and she ends up just being an Asian American woman from Chicago or something like that. So those kind of continued for the first few seasons, and then I think they got a little smarter. Jay is the grandfather, and you can see him actually in the back of this shot on the video right here. And he is pretty homophobic, and that gets better, but his toxic masculinity is kind of apparent all the way through all 11 seasons. And he just kind of becomes that trope of the strong head of the family. And a lot of times at the expense of his family members. He's a huge stereotype of an older white man. whatever that means. There are a ton of LGBT jokes that get made in the show, especially in the first few seasons. One of the articles I was reading was about how crappy it is that Mitch's dad, Jay, is the one that makes the jokes at his son's expense. They're almost always about Mitch and Mitch and Cam hardly ever say anything back, so it's just kind of like the family gets to dig at them. It's also from Mitch and Cam about other members within the same community. In just the first few minutes of the first episode, they talk about, they like make a dig at a lesbian couple carrying their children because aren't they angry enough already? They also, in the first episode, there are some anti-trans jokes that Jay makes, and then even Phil and Claire make some in the later part of the first season. So it just kind of, it has turned into so much more progressive than it started. Let's see. And then Haley. Haley is the stereotype of like the dumb, pretty, popular girl. And Screen Rat is an organization that I read an article about from that points out the good thing she's pretty line comes up so often with Haley. Within the first minute of the show, they're already shaming Haley's clothing. It is constantly a joke about Haley being, at least she's pretty. That's like a trope that keeps coming up. And I wanted to approach this through Mulvey's male gaze. And so I wrote out this thing that says, the male gaze is apparent in two ways to me. The first is Haley in the world of the show. As a character, she dresses for the male gaze within the world she lives in the show. She cares about looks in a stereotypical societal way, and it's talked about between other characters within the show. But I would argue that the male gaze is apparent even one step further in the making of the show. Why did the writers feel this was an important element of this character, if not for the real-world bias of the male gaze, because she's such a stereotype? The male gaze is evident in the shooting of the show, costuming, and even the storylines that Haley's involved in. It's interesting to me that a character so obviously affected by and aware of the male gaze is still not shot as an actor with the male gaze influence. All that to say is I think it's like a double fold of the male gaze.
So Sofia Vergara plays a character, Gloria, who is an immigrant woman from Colombia who has married Jay, a rich white man. And especially in season 1, her character falls into a lot of very common stereotypes. She is the stereotypical beautiful trophy wife. She is often portrayed as very short-tempered and loud, which is a common stereotype for Latina and Hispanic women. In episode 22, which involves them going to an airport to try to get to Hawaii, she makes a comment that she knows a great deal about smuggling weapons into airports because she's from Colombia, which brings up the stereotype of Latin countries being dangerous or people from Latin countries being inherently criminals or having been exposed to criminal activity just because they lived in these countries. In reading up on this, I found an analysis article, and I found this really interesting quote that says, "The impact of television portrayals of minorities is significant because of the ability of television images to activate racial stereotypes and the power exerted by visual images," which to me basically just means that even if they're small things, just passing comments, they still do influence the people watching these shows and how they think about minorities and other people portrayed. And then the other older woman in the show, Claire, is the stereotypical stay-at-home mother, the homemaker. In the first season, she doesn't really have a personality. She's kind of just portrayed as like the nagging mom, and she is often just used to contrast Phil, who desperately tries to be just the cool, laid-back dad. She doesn't really get her own plot points in the first season. She's just there to like give advice or further the plot for other characters, especially the male characters. Although in the first season, she doesn't fall into all of the stereotypes of the homemaker. She's not perfect like a lot of other housewife stereotypes in sitcoms are. She's very quirky. And in later seasons, she gets a lot more personality, and the writers give her a lot of her own plot lines so that she can develop as a character.
Yeah, so we think that this show has not gotten everything right, and people that write articles on the internet agree, but I do think that it's definitely grown. From the first episode, with all of its kind of insensitive jokes and marginalizing groups, it has gone to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where now they have political plot lines, and they have hired a trans actor to be on the show, and they seem to really care about improving their world, and in a way that I think was not so much around in the first season. Um, and it allows for public recognition of all types of families and identities, because this is one of the first shows that we saw that truly represented so many different types of families within one, one group.
Yeah, and going along with that, the popularity and accessibility of the show, because it is a primetime cable show, means that these non-traditional families can be recognized, like Virginia said, and also normalized in everyday homes. The popularity also helps disprove a lot of arguments that previous writers and directors made against putting non-traditional families on TV, saying that non-white main characters don't sell, or LGBT characters are too risky to put into shows. So this show really helps change the format and allows other writers to write what they want. That's not just white middle-class family sitcom about nothing.
Yeah. Cool. And then we have our sources listed over here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you for listening to our presentation. And if you have any questions, we're going to post this on the discussion board, and you can ask us below. Anything else, Rae?
I think that's pretty much it.
Cool. I'm going to stop recording then.
Awesome.